All right, everyone, welcome to week 3. So this is the final week of Intro to Coding Live. We've got sessions 7, 8, and 9. Session 7, we're going to cover truthy, falsy, and then also recursion. Session 8, Greg Drobny is going to come talk to us. Again, he's the student coordinator or student outreach coordinator for Code Platoon. He kind of handles some of the logistics stuff for the application process. So Guillermo's the technical stuff, Greg's the logistical stuff. And then session 9 is just kind of a review session. We'll probably have a couple of challenges and then maybe an outside challenge. I'll kind of show you what it looks like to work inside VS Code some more. Any other questions that anyone has, and then that'll be the wrap for the class. So let's go ahead and get started. It's 6:08 p.m. Central Time, Monday, March 4th. So let's go ahead and jump into truthy and falsy. And each value has an inherent Boolean value, generally known as either truthy or falsy. There's only a handful of values that are falsy in JavaScript, and that's false, the number 0, an empty string, null, undefined, and nan. Pretty much everything else in JavaScript will return truthy. And we can check this because we can basically have it resolved to either true or false, depending on what you put in there. So we can write a very simple if statement. So we can say if, and we'll just call it X for right now. And we'll say, so if X is true, else and so up here, if I were to do let X equal the number 0, and we run this, X is falsy, right? And sorry, there's no E in there. This is that. And if I were to make it the string of 0, now it's truthy, right? And an empty string is falsy, null is falsy. What else was there? Nan, we talked about that a little bit last week. Falsy. So, but an empty array or an empty object. So empty string is falsy, but an empty array or an empty object is truthy. Right, and then basically, so anything other than an empty string. So I believe even if we just put a space in here, right, it's not completely empty, even though it doesn't look like there's anything in there. That's truthy, right? Undefined. So if we don't assign a value to X and it's undefined, we should get falsy, right? And we do. And then anything else, even an empty function, right? So the string of false is just a non-empty string. So false, it's truthy. So, and that's how we allow values to, and again, we're just allowing these values to either resolve to true or false, so truthy or falsy. Any questions on this concept? Okay. So next is recursion. Has anyone worked with recursion yet or know what recursion is by chance? Want to take a stab at explaining it? And at the most basic level, this is what recursion is. So it's a process in which a function calls itself. So using recursion to solve a problem requires two cases: a base case, which is the condition in which the function stops calling itself, and a recursive case, which is the case in which the function returns itself. right? So if we were to look at this function here, right? So function sum up to, and then we're giving it a number. The base case is if num triple equals 1. So if it's strictly equal to 1, return 1. Else, the recursive case is return num plus sum up to num minus 1. Right. So what this looks like, if we were to call this recursively, right? So let's give it a number. Let's go ahead and code this out over here real quick. Turn on that line as well. There it is. Spacing there a little bit. All right. So if we call this, right, and we do sum up to 5, what I'm expecting is that I'm going to get 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, which should be 15 when I run this. So this is what I should see over here. I'm just going to comment this out for right now. Oops, and I get 1. If num is triple equal to 1, return 1. And it's because I didn't do this. Return sum up to n minus 1. Num plus sum up to, there we go. Right, so there's my 15. Now, we didn't see it go through each of these, right? But what's happening is the first time I call this function, right? So when I call this function down here, what this line does is basically we're moving towards this base case and we're not there yet. So sorry, let me put my note in here. Cursive case. Right. And so what happens is we call it with a sum up to 5 over here. So num becomes 5. And so if 5 is triple equal to 1, which is false, so we do not hit the base case. We come down here into the recursive case and we return 5 plus sum up to 5 minus 1. Right. And this is calling the function a second time within the function. That's what makes it recursive. This is a way to basically solve a recursive problem is solving a problem that you would normally use a loop for, so like an iterative solution. But we talked about this last week too, right? Give me the largest number out of a array, and you could just do math.max and then the 3 dots, which is the spread operator next to an array. We dump the array into math.max and it gives us the highest number. And if you were to go into an interview and they said, how would you do this? And you say, well, I'd use math.max and the spread operator. They're like, okay, great. Now, how would you do it without it? Okay, cool. Now, how would you do it without using a loop, right? And then, so that's the next thing, it becomes recursive. And so this is a concept in JavaScript, like recursion is in some languages do not have loops in them, so you always use recursion. So when you get into functional programming, something like closure, in JavaScript, Python, most languages, you can solve something recursively but typically you're better off solving it iteratively because it's more dependable and it's generally less memory intensive. And when we do a single recursive call here, it's not a huge deal. Like, I mean, you can call recursively quite a bit, but if you were to do something like one of the challenges is the Fibonacci sequence recursively, and each time you make a recursive call, you're actually making two more calls. And so if anyone is familiar with the grain of rice on the chessboard, right? Like if it keeps doubling every single time, you don't have to go that far before all of a sudden you have millions or billions of recursive calls. And so in that instance, it becomes very easy, especially when you're using a replet, to run it out of memory and crash your program. So, but for us with this, right, like this is just a single, for each recursive call, you're only calling it one time. And so this basically sum up to 5 minus 1, it turns into sum up to 4. 4 is not equal to 1, so we don't hit the base case, so we do it recursively. We return 4 plus sum up to 4 minus 1, which is now 3, right? And so we just repeat ourselves until we get to sum up to 1. We hit our base case, so we return 1, and so now this becomes return 2 plus 1. This becomes return 3 plus 3. This becomes return 4 plus 6. And then this becomes return 5 plus 10. And then when we hit our final return, we've popped everything off the call stack. Then we actually get our final value, which is 15. And we can take a look at this in Python Tutor as well to kind of get a visual of it step by step. JavaScript. This. Right, and so the same thing here, excuse me, the program starts, we load our function into memory, we get everything ready to go. We've got sum up to, we call it with num being 5. So this is not true, so we skip over this, we go to our else case. All right, so we end up calling it again. So sum up to with the number 4, 3, 2, 1, right? And so now we've hit our base case and we're going to return 1, right? So the return value is 1. The next one up is we're going to return 3. We're going to return 6. We're going to return 10. And then we're going to return 15. That's the final step. We've basically gone up and down our call stack recursively. We call it as many times as we need to. Once we hit the base case, we start resolving and popping them back off the stack. All right. With this, we touch on it lightly in Intro to Coding. There's no recursion required on the application for Code Platoon, probably for most boot camps, I would guess. We'll talk about it some more in boot camp. You may get hit with a recursive question, like when you're interviewing for an entry-level job, or like I said, if you nail the question and there's still time left, they may push you towards like a recursive solution, something you solved iteratively. And but outside of that, like especially as a web developer, if you're working in JavaScript and Python, you won't use recursion very frequently in your day-to-day jobs. The only time I ever use recursion is when I'm teaching this class again. All right, so that was it for the two concepts that we needed to cover tonight. Any questions on truthy, falsy, or on recursion? Okay, so let's go ahead and pick a challenge. We'll take a look here. All right, so I believe we look back in here, we finished off with high score, right? And so let's go ahead and take a look at two strikes. Actually, you know what? Let's see here. Last four socials, that one. Oops. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and do last four social actually first, so we can get into some manipulating data inside of an array. Let's grab this. Oops. Fork it. All right, so if we're going to truly return the last four social with zeros included in there, we're not going to be able to return them as a number, right? Because if I do console.log 0156 as a number, right? I get something weird over here, right? And again, this is going to go back to how JavaScript treats numbers and the base 10 stuff. So we want to basically compare these against strings so that we know that we're getting the last four. That's fairly common whenever you have to deal with a situation where you know you may have leading zeros in your response. You no longer save those responses as numbers. You'll typically save them as string representations of numbers. All right, so parameter is we're going to get a 9-digit number that represents a social security number, and we're going to return a string with a 4-digit with digits of the SSN provided. Example, see below. Okay, so I know, as always, All right. So this one should be fairly straightforward. There's also hints down here, some built-in methods. Some of this may be overkill. Maybe you need to split it, maybe you don't. But are there any questions for me before I put you into breakout rooms? No? Okay. I'm going to pause the recording. All right, everyone, welcome back from the last four of Social Security challenge. Excuse me. So yeah, welcome back from the last four of social challenge. It is 6:43 p.m. Let's go ahead and go over a solution together. So again, this one wasn't too tough. Just run it here, make sure that we're getting everything. These are gold, so we know that we're dealing with numbers here, not strings. And I need to get this over to a string so that I can isolate part of it, right? And so I can do toString. Right, and now the numbers are no longer gold, they're white, which means that we're dealing with string representations of numbers. And if I want to, so a string in JS, right? Substring, slice would work as well, right? And so if we look at substring here, we give it a method, value returns part of the string from the start index up to and excluding the end index, right? And so if we're looking at it based on index values, we can do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And because we're going all the way through the end, we probably don't even need an end there, right? Oh, sorry, substring is all lowercase. We'll start counting at 5. So we've got that. We're still returning false because I'm console.logging instead of returning. But if I pop this out into a return, right, there's my true values. And so that's all there is to this one. Again, we're learning how to manipulate data types and grab a chunk of it. You could solve this with an array. We could split it and then basically just take again the same thing with the array. Like we could take the slice of the array. And if we really wanted to, we could write a loop and iterate the start the count at like I equals 5 instead of 0, and add it out that way. So there's a couple of different ways to solve it, but this is probably the easiest way to solve this one. All right, so it is 6:46. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break here. We'll start back up at 6:56. And then we're gonna hop into the two strikes one. And then again, we'll do the breakout and then we'll go over it together as a class. Any questions for me before I send us to break? All right, cool. I'll see everyone in about 10 minutes. All right, so the next challenge we're going to do is the two strikes challenge. So let's go ahead, grab it. All right, and with this one, because we're not using an actual testing suite, we can't just use a triple equals to compare arrays in JavaScript. Will always get false. We talked about that back like in week 1 or week 2, I believe. And so let's go ahead, take a look at the README. So we're going to write a method that takes in a string array of license plate numbers. The method should return a string array of any plate numbers that appeared at least twice. If none of the plate numbers appeared more than once, the method should return an empty array. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the prep for this. So we're going to get one param, which is an array of strings. That may or may not contain duplicates, and we're going to return an array that is either empty or contains any duplicates. All right, so we'll say see below. And so for the pseudocode now. All right, so all right, so I'm going to need a new array to hold any duplicates that I find. So I'm going to iterate through my plates array, right? So that's what I'm getting passed in here is plates, and grab a plate and then compare it to the other plates that I see to see if a duplicate shows up. If I have more than one duplicate of the same plate, right? So if we look down here in this third example where I have 1, 2, 3, 2, and 2, I only have 1, 2 in here, not multiple twos for each time it was a duplicate. So even if this was something like this, we only want 2 in there one time. So we need to check for that as well. And then once I have added all of my duplicates into the array, I will then return the new array that I use to hold my duplicates, and that will be the answer. All right. Any questions for me on this one? All right, so let me pass this through Slack here. this. Here. All right, so I am going to, with this round, again, the normal rules, I'd like somebody to share. I'm gonna move everyone into one breakout room this time around and let you work, and then it is 7:03, so I'm gonna give everyone until 7:30 on this one, and then we'll come back to class and we'll go over it together. Any questions from me before I send everyone to the breakout rooms? Okay, here we go. All right, 7:31 p.m., 7:32 p.m. Central Time, getting back from the two strikes challenge. So let's go ahead and go over this one in class and see what we get as far as a solution. All right, so first things first, let's go ahead and look at what plates looks like. All right, so there's my first call, my second call, my third call. And so I also will need a new array to hold the duplicates that I find. So let's go ahead and say let duplicates equal an empty array. And we know that if we don't find any duplicates, we return an empty array. If we find duplicates, we return that array of duplicates. So we know down here, we're going to return duplicates pretty much no matter what. And so if we run this, right, empty array, empty array, empty array. So this one is now correct, just because by virtue of the fact that we're not doing anything, we're returning an empty array, but the other two are still wrong. So let's take a look here. Now, we know that we want to have an empty array to hold any duplicates. So I also know that I'm going to need to iterate through my plates array and grab a plate and then compare it to other plates to see if the duplicates show up. Now, one of the tricks of this one is that we're so used to writing for loops that we jump into a for loop. But let's take a look at this because we know that we want to grab a plate and hold it in isolation and compare it to the other ones, right? So if I do something like this, where if I go for let I equal 0, I less than plates dot length, I plus plus. All right, and if I console.log plates I, right, so there's each of my individual plates, and the length of this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements, so 0 through 4, but the length is 5. And now I need to also grab a plate. It doesn't matter if I grab which one of these plates, but I don't want to compare that plate against itself. So I need to remove it from the calculation. All right. And so how do we take an element out of an array? We can use shift to take it from the front. We can use pop to take it from the back. Right. And so if I do let plate to compare equal plates dot pop. Right. So if I'm doing this inside of this first for loop, what the issue becomes is the very first time I do this, plates dot length is no longer 5. So now plates dot length is 4. So I will not end up iterating through the correct amount of times here. And the solution to this is to use a while loop, right? And so let's go ahead and we're going to grab this and we're going to save this. And I'm going to get rid of this for right now. And if we do while plates, all right, and so plates, basically, we'll do plates.length, all right? So the first time we iterate through, length is 5, and then 4, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1, and then eventually length is 0. And we just talked about this at the beginning of class with truthy and falsy, right? So any number is truthy, but the number 0 is falsy. And so if we just loop and we pop something off each time that we loop through, right? And let's just console.log plate to compare, right? I'm not writing an infinite loop here because each time I loop through here, I am going to reduce my length by 1 until it hits 0. Then this will stop resolving to truthy and it'll resolve to false. Whoop, I don't need AI, sorry. Come on, buddy. So let's go ahead and run this. Plate that compare once that pop. Let's go there can appear in a single statement context. Sorry. What are you upset about? That should not be throwing an error. Oh, sorry. That's what I did wrong is I did not put my curly braces in there. Let's try that again. There we go. And so there is me popping off the last plate in the list each time until there's no more plates to pop off, and then my loop automatically stops. Now, within here, I will need another loop because I'm going to go through and basically find or take this plate to compare and compare it against all of the other plates in there. I could also use a array should have like a dot includes or dot include. And we'll come back and we'll clean this up later and we'll do it. But for right now, I'm going to write it with 2 loops because all includes is doing is its own loop just behind the scenes, and it's been abstracted away from us. Excuse me. All right, so now I can do for let I equals 0, I less than plates.length and I plus plus. Right, and so each time we loop through the while loop, so we're going to loop through the while loop where the length is 5. We're going to pop a plate off it, so the length is going to drop to 4. We're then going to enter our for loop where this length is going to be 4. Right, and then we're going to do everything we need to do in here. And then we're going to exit our for loop. And then we're going to start our second loop of the while loop, right? And so we're going to pop another plate off the end. This time through the length is going to be 3. So each time we iterate through, our for loop is going to get shorter and shorter because we're taking plates off. All right. So we now need to compare to see if our plate to compare is equal to plates I, right? So the first time through is going to be plate 0. So the very first time I loop through, I'm sorry, we pop from the back, I'm going to pop this plate off. Then I'm going to compare it to, on the first execution of the while loop, I'm going to pop this plate off. And then on the first execution of the for loop, I'm going to see if these two plates are equal to each other. They're not. This should console.log false. The second time through, it should be true, and then false, and then we'll get a bunch more falses as we iterate through subsequent while loops. So let's go ahead and take a look at that and see what we get. Right, so false, and then true, false, false, right? And we keep going through there, and each time we do it, we're console.logging our plate to compare. We don't really need that anymore. All right, so we know that we're pinging at least once, which is what we're looking for on this first one. So instead of just doing a console.log, we can say if that then, and how to add element to array in JS, right? So dot push, the array prototype dot push. So I can just do reference my array, say dot push, and then give it the value that I want to push. And so I can say duplicates dot push, and we'll just say plate to compare. And down here where we're returning, well, because we're not doing any comparisons, we can just return. We'll see what we get here. All right, so there is my array with just my one plate in there. All right, sorry, I'm gonna pause here 1 second. I've got a cat locked in the room that's yelling. 1 sec, I'll be right back. All right, and so now with this one, right, we get our empty array, so we're good there. And now on this last one, where there's lots of twos, right, I get an array with a bunch of twos in there. And that is because we're matching, popping it off, and like we keep matching and hitting over and over again. So what could I do to prevent myself from pushing duplicates of my duplicates in there? Did anyone get this far as solving it, or have a thought on what line of code I could change to prevent this? So right here in the if statement, I could add something else, right? So I could say and I'm just going to pseudocode it right now. The dupe is not already in duplicates. All right. And so that is the additional check that I want to do. And so what I can do here is do something like this. So if I say, let example equal this, and let's comment these out here real quick. And at console.log do example dot includes 2, right? I get true here. And now just like there is an includes, we scroll up here to E, there is no excludes, right? And so if it is already included in here, what I actually want is this other side of the and to resolve to false, so I can add the bang operator here, and that reverses the polarity of my Boolean. Right, so now I get a false. And so now what I could do is say and duplicates dot includes plate to compare. And we'll add that bang operator in there. And now, let's go to this. Let's turn this back on. Now I only get it the one time, right? But if I add a 3 in here, all right, they're both in there. And if I add 3, 3, and 3, and 3, all right, I still only get each of them one time, right? So the first one is checking to see that the plate that I'm holding aside to compare is equal to the plate that I'm comparing it to. And then the second check is saying, if it's already in here, do not add it again. All right, so that is pretty much the solution for this one that I would go with. Does anyone have any questions on this one? And it shouldn't impact our other ones, right? We still get 1, we don't get anything in this one, and this one would look like that. All right, so let's go ahead. It's 7:47. Let's take a 8-minute break here. We'll get started back up at 7:55, and we should be able to knock out another challenge for the evening, and then we'll call it for the night. All right, I'll see everyone in about 8 minutes. All right, welcome back from the break, 7:55 p.m. Central Time, March 4th. We're going to pick our next challenge, which is going to be sum of the negatives. We're going to be using arrays and loops here. So we're going to come in, we're going to fork it. Got it over here. Let's take a look at the README. So we're going to write a method which takes in an array of integers and returns the sum of only the negative integers in the array. All right, so this first one, 3, -1, -9, and 2. We're basically going to get rid of the positive numbers, and we're only going to look at the negative numbers, and we get -10. Same thing for here, 4, 5, and 1, no negative numbers, so we're just going to get 0. All right, so let's go ahead and copy this, throw it over here. There's our false, false. All right, so we're going to get an array of positive and negative integers. And we're going to return an integer basically less than or equal to 0, which is going to all right, so as always, console.log our param, and then we know that we're going to need something to hold the value. All right, so that's what we've got with this one. We'll call it 8 o'clock right now. I will say I'll pull everyone back in at about 8:25 or so. If you finish early, feel free to shoot me a Slack message or pop back into the room. And then we'll pull everyone in and we'll move to the next one if there's enough time. All right. So with that, let me pause the recording. All right, so 8:13 p.m. Group got a solution early, so came back to class. So we'll go ahead and go over. We'll actually go over two different ways to solve this. So we'll solve it using a loop here and some conditional logic to get through this, and then we'll go through it. Excuse me, using a couple of built-in methods to solve it, like if we were actually going to solve this for production code. All right, so let's go here. First, we're going to console.log num array. All right, so there we go. 3, -1, -9, 2, 4, 5, 1. So that looks good to me. And I also know that I'm going to need to return a value here that's going to be 0 or less than 0. So let's go ahead and we'll say let's sum equal, and we're going to start it off at 0. And we're going to return sum down here. All right, so right off the bat, through virtue of the fact that this needs to be 0, this is true, even though we haven't implemented everything yet. But next, we're going to loop through our array. And so let's go ahead and throw that in there. So we'll do this, and we'll say for let I equal 0, I less than num array dot length, and I plus plus. And let's go ahead and console.log num array I and make sure we're getting what we think we want to see. So 3, -1, -9, 2, 4, 5, 1. All right, so we're getting each number in the array individually. So that looks good to me. So now we need to determine if this number, num array I, is greater than or less than 0. All right, so we can say if num array I is less than 0, we need to take some action. All right, so we need to do sum plus equal num array I. Well, let's see what we get here. All right, so we get true, true there. So that means that we were hitting that correctly. So within our loop, let's go ahead and console.log sum, just so we can see what's happening. All right, so as we loop through this first one, sum is 0. We don't do anything the first time through. The second time through, we add -1 to it. So now sum is -1. The third time we loop through, we add -9 to it. So sum is -10. And again, on this last one, with the 2, we don't do anything with it. So sum is -10 again. All right. So this would be the working solution that I would expect to see from class. Michaela, did this look similar to what your group came up with?
Yeah, that's exactly what we do.
Okay, cool. And so this is a great solution. We don't need this in here. And we also don't need an else statement, because if it's positive, I don't need it to do anything. So I'm just checking to see if it's negative. I only need the if side of this. All right. So now the other way that we could take a look at solving this, and let's go ahead and comment this out real quick, is let's look at some built-ins here, right? So console.log num array, and we'll run it again. So there's our 2 arrays. And we talked about this last week. We have a built-in that's called filter, right? And so just by typing in filter, a function that accepts up to 3 arguments, the filter method calls the predicate function one time for each element in the array, returns the elements of an array that meet the conditions specified in a callback function. All right, so we'll just call this num. And then let's do num greater than 0. Let's see what we get when we do that. All right, so that actually filtered the negative numbers out. So we're only left with our positive numbers. So let's go ahead and flip this to num less than 0. All right, so now we've got -1, -9, and empty. So this looks good to me. These are numbers that I can work with. So the next one, and we haven't talked about this one yet, but there is a array.prototype reduce. And what that does is the reduce method of an array instance executes a user supplied reducer callback function on each element of the array in order, passing in return value from the calculation on the preceding element. So basically it allows you to do math on each element, but not individually, cumulatively. All right, and so we've got the accumulator and we've got the current value. Quite often when you see reduce, you'll just see this basically abbreviated as A comma C instead of accumulator comma current value. And we want to add all of the values together. And we also have initial value, which is optional, right? And so initial value is a value to which the accumulator is initialized, right? So if we don't give it an initial value, we just start with the first element and go from there. Right, and so with this, if I do dot reduce and I say a comma C, and then I say a plus C, friends there. So, whoops, and one more for the console.log. Numerator filter, that, reduce, AC, that, and then all of them. So when we run this, unexpected token. So I've got something extra here. Memory filter and num. So that should be my callback function plus C, and there's closing my reduce, and there's closing my constant out.
You have to do a comma dot zero after C.
I will, but I wanted to throw the error first and explain what happened. And so you're absolutely right. So the first time through, all right, so if I just comment this out, this works. I get my -10. All right, now with this one, when I run it again, I get type error, reduces empty array with no initial value. So because all of these get filtered out, right? So if I go back to just this, right? All I have is an empty array here. And so there is no initial value. So as soon as I try and add on null, I throw an error. And that's what this is telling me, is that I need to assign an initial value there. And so it's usually good to, even if you don't necessarily need it, like we don't need it in the first case, but to prevent unexpected errors, you can always load in a initial value that won't screw with the rest of your math. So in this case, 0, because if this is empty and nothing else happens, the initial value is 0. We can't add anything to 0. We just return 0. All right. And so there's my -10. There's my 0. I'm still getting false, false because I'm not returning yet. There's my true, true. And then I clean this up a little bit by bringing these down onto their own lines. I'll save it and run the formatter. And then this is, if I had to solve a situation like this in my normal day-to-day work, this is how I would tackle it. So any questions on how I solve this either way? Okay. So let's go. It's 8:23. We've got enough time to do another one here. Let's go ahead and do range. Now, with that, if maybe they don't in JavaScript, so there isn't just a range builder. So without using, I don't think the, well, quick aside here. So all of these built-in methods in JavaScript are over time have basically people who run and maintain the JavaScript language decide what becomes a built-in method directly in JavaScript, that it's important enough, it's time saving enough, and pretty much every language has something like this, right? And these things change. Like the stuff with array is pretty stable, but like when we were looking at string, right? Like we see at one point, this was something that was useful. It was a built-in. It's no longer used, right? And so if we think more on the web development side, right? Like if you remember blink, like just being able to make your text blink, that's kind of been taken away from JavaScript, and we would do that in the CSS or the HTML at this point. Same with like bold. Controlling these things have been kind of taken, like the responsibility is no longer in JavaScript when we're doing web development. We would do it in cascading style sheets or some flavor of that. And so a lot of these have gone away and they're no longer used in the language. Now, as you continue to grow and learning to code, there's also, I mean, one, there's thousands and thousands, probably tens of thousands of different packages out there for Node, which are all pre-written chunks of code that are usually organized into like a family. So like if I wanted to do like parse CSS and JS, right? So like there's probably some built-in stuff that is directly in JavaScript. And I'm sorry, I didn't want to say CSS, parse a CSV and JSS, right? But however, like on NPM, which is Node Package Manager, which is like one of the big maintainers of the language and the libraries, there's probably a couple of dozen on these. Some of them are old and haven't been updated in years. Some of them don't get used very frequently, but like this one gets downloaded 3.6 million times a year. And so CSV, the comma separated values, is like, I mean, when you go into Excel, you can export your work as a CSV. This is how tabular data gets stored quite often. And so if you're going to feed a CSV into a program and you want JSON to have it come out the other side so that it can be consumed in basically by a JavaScript program, or sending it to a front end so that it can be displayed on a website, like you need to convert that information. Now, you could write your own program for that, and you'll start, and for 95% of the use cases, you're probably fine doing it on your own. But if anyone were to ever have a last name, say like a Spanish last name that has a special character in it, or if someone feeds some German in there and there's an umlaut over it or an accent mark, something along those lines, it'll blow your program. And there are thousands of special characters out there. And you would have to write your software to handle all of those edge cases. Someone has already done that, and they've turned it into a node package that you can download and install into your program. And then you just reach into their package and you pull out the parts that you need. You pull out their built-in functions. And right, so like we're going to grab a cert from a cert CSV parse. We're going to import the function parse from CSV parse, and then we're going to use it. And so it's going to go in there, and behind all of this is the hundreds or thousands of lines of code that someone's already written to handle all of those edge cases for you. And so this is very common. Like very rarely will you, unless you're doing it for an exercise, just write a piece of software from end to end without involving some other type of package. If you're doing it in JavaScript, especially like if you're getting into a framework like React, which is just like a big package that has lots of strong opinions on what's going on, you're, as soon as you start using React, you're already using hundreds of packages. And then depending on what you're doing with it, you're going to pull in more packages. You want to do testing, you're going to use Jest. So you're going to pull in the Jest package, right? So, and you install it. And so like the Jest testing library is thousands of lines of code already, 20 million downloads a week. And you are then going to write functions that call on the existing Jest code base, right? So we can go look at it over here in GitHub, right? So here's all the stuff, the docs, the packages, examples. Somewhere in one of these folders is all of the actual code that you need to get things going. All of their overhead, so their continuous integration, paperwork, using it with ESLint. So if you're running it with Yarn, if you're going to run it with NPM, and all of these different things are what's gone into the like having this available for you to use, so that you can just plug it in and start using it. And you see like 7,000 commits. I don't know exactly how many lines of code are in here, but I'm guessing thousands, if not tens of thousands of lines of code, right? So used by 12 million people, 1,500 people have contributed to like supporting this and updating it, right? Some of these things haven't been updated in 5 years. Some of this stuff got updated yesterday, right? And so this is how you end up writing software, and all this stuff is called open source. And what all of this goes back to is there is one called Lodash. Let's see if we can search for it. Yeah, so just one word. And so, yeah, 42.5 million weekly downloads. And what Lodash is a bunch of additional built-ins for all of these data types and more. But I mean, hundreds of them. And so like we can go over to GitHub, look at what they've got going on here, all the different things. So like how we built our own function to make things camel case, because JavaScript doesn't do that automatically. There's a Lodash function that automatically converts words to camel case for you, right? And it looks like they're using some regex here, right? But that's the whole thing, is like when you are using something like dot filter or dot includes, like, and you're not writing the loop, it's because someone else already did it for you, right? Like here's a dot reduce, a dot replace, right? Here's a ternary operator, and then returning the result. So when we're using one of these, right? So like dot filter, dot reduce, even though we only see that here, that is going into the underlying code of JavaScript, and it's accessing a function, that someone has written, I mean, probably 20 years ago now, 25 years ago now, and executing that code, right? And so convert string to camel case, breaks it down, category param, returns. So just like what we see when we go to MDN, it's just in a slightly different format. But like as we scroll through here, you can see there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different built-ins here, right? And so, and I think one of them would probably solve this problem, right? So like range, right? So if you were to click in here, that would do what this problem is asking you to do manually, right? So given two numbers, generate a range in an array, right? And so JavaScript doesn't do it by itself. Someone probably finds that pretty useful. So it gets written into another package, you install it in. Like I'm pretty sure if I wanted to, I don't like the package that they have in here, but right, so like here's Lodash. Like we could install Lodash directly into this, access Lodash in here and write the function. And so like at work, for me, my front end is React JavaScript or React TypeScript now, and my back end is Ruby on Rails. We use between the front end and the back end, we use hundreds of open source packages to write our software, and we access these methods to do these different things. And you can contribute to these. You can actually create your own. Most of the like on the NPM website, on the rubygems.org, they will tell you like, hey, if you think you've got some code that you want to push up as a package or a gem, here's the submission instructions, and you push them up, and then other people can download your code and put it into their project and use that information. No, sorry, it's hailing outside here in Chicago. It was 70 degrees today, and I heard a roaring noise and pinging, and I couldn't figure out what it is, but it's ice smacking into my window now. So welcome to Chicago. All right, so let's go ahead and let's talk about this one. We'll get through it. We'll break out into the groups or into the group, and then we'll come back and we should be able to have a chance to talk through this as a solution as well. All right, so let me just grab this whole thing. All right. So again, because we're building an array, can't build the comparison there. Close that. All right, so undefined, undefined, we're not returning anything out of here. That looks good to me. So we're gonna get two params. And we're going to return an array. Okay, so it's 8:40. Do you guys want to take a stab at this as the group? And probably have to go over the solution on Wednesday, or do you just want me to walk through this with the class together and then it'll take about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll be done for the day when we're done with that.
Walk through the solution.
Sorry, what's that?
Walk through the solution with you.
Okay, so we're just gonna skip right to walking through the solution.
That's my vote. I think that's Esteban's vote too.
Okay,
I don't know about everyone else.
all right, so we'll walk through it, but I'm gonna ask some questions while we do this here. All right, so I know that I need something to hold all of these values, right? So what am I gonna do here on line 15? Right, so I can do we'll call it range. And what am I gonna assign range to?
An empty array.
Yep, an empty array, right? So that's it. That's all I need. And also I'm going to console.log min and max. All right, so 3, 7, -4, and 1. So that looks good to me. All right, and then I'm going to return my range down here at the bottom. I should just be returning 2 empty arrays right now. So now to do this, we talked about this. I need to iterate. So I need a loop. What type of loop would you guys take a stab at as far as like what direction I should go with this? So feel free to shout it out, throw it in the chat, whatever.
The for loop.
Yep, so we're gonna do a for loop. So we'll do for let I equals 0 less than or while we'll just say I is less than 10, and then I plus plus in here. So if we do that, oops, comma, semicolon, and I console.log I, right? I just get 0 through 9 here. I've hard coded my values. So for this first one, if this is 3, how can I change, or what do I change up here on line 16 to start counting at 4?
I equal min plus 1.
So right, so we're gonna change the I equals 0 to I equals min. And we'll just start right there. Right, and so now I start counting at 3. And so if we do plus 1, right, I'm starting counting at 4, I'm starting to count at -3. Right, and now the same thing here is instead of 10, well, I can say less than max. Right, let's see what we get here. Right, so I get 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, -3 through 0. So my for loop is looking good. And instead of console.logging, I need to start adding my values to my array. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So if I say range.push and I say I, right, I get 4, 5, 6, -3, -2, -1, and 0. Right, so that is the solution for this one. All right, does anyone else have any other questions for me? I don't know if you could hear me over what's going on in the background here.